All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Stephen Beach. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Craft Impact. Today, I have Faustin Weber with me, one of our marketing growth strategists. We wanted to talk a little bit about messaging today. So, messaging can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and we just want to talk about how we look at messaging and how it underpins kind of what we do from a digital marketing standpoint, how it kind of feeds our work with financial advisors, and maybe some key takeaways for you as the advisor or kind of a managing partner at an advisory firm. Maybe you could find a couple of unique ways to kind of look at it, or a couple of action items for you out of this conversation. So that's our hope. So why don't we kind of dig in, Faustin? When we say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Advisor, we're going to work on your firm's messaging. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to Craft? And how do we start into that? How do we go about our work there? Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's definitely evolved a lot, especially since we've started working with financial advisors exclusively over the last 4 years. I remember coming in, Stephen, and we were taking on a lot of clients initially in a lot of different types of industries, right? And so there was often a disconnect in terms of how the company talked about themselves and what they actually did. And I remember we used this story brand narrative process, which is a great process where you put the client in the hero role, and so many businesses want to put themselves in the hero role where in fact you want to have the client be the one that goes through the hero's journey, and the company themselves is really just the guide, right? And so that works so well for so many different companies. But we realized when we started employing this process with RIAs in the space that there are a lot of similarities between what the RIAs do in comparison to each other, right? When you compare these independent firms with Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch type of investment advisors, there's obviously a huge contrast between the comprehensive financial planning and investment management, the overarching wealth management that RIAs offer versus the lackluster service in a lot of cases that the Morgan Stanley type advisors offer. And so there's a big contrast there, but when you start comparing the RIAs to themselves, there's a lot more similarities and overlap, right? They have a lot of CFPs on staff, there's a lot of CFAs on staff. They might outsource their investments, but a lot of the investment approaches are pretty similar. And so we're into a problem with how we would approach messaging, right? Like, how do you differentiate one advisory firm versus another? And ended up employing a streamlined process at the beginning of when we take on a new client. And one of the key things is, and I think this was your idea originally, Stephen, as we were kind of getting up and
Sure, I'll
running,
take credit. Yeah.
yeah, that's right, is we set up interviews with our clients, usually about 5 to 7 interviews. And we usually ask our clients to find a mix of their clients that have been onboarded recently with the firm, and then their clients that they've had for a few years, right? A lot of times the clients have followed them as they become independent over the last like 5 to 10 years. And then we also ask the clients that we're working with to pick some clients that might fit into their niche or their persona that they want to attract more of, like their ideal client. I think this has been huge for us in figuring out exactly what differentiates the firms that we start to work with, because we can talk to clients of different demographics where they'll share insights on like what they find valuable, what they find that really differentiates the firm that they're working with from others in the space. They'll talk to us about how they evaluated and compared different firms as part of the sales process. A lot of great insights that the advisory firms themselves didn't know, right? And then we'll really dig into like the platforms that they use, right? Are they on LinkedIn, right? Do they consume financial information on social media? What do they really think about the client newsletters that are being sent out? Would they consider consuming, a video type approach, or would they follow some of the content if we start sharing it on different social platforms? So I think that's a key point that sort of becomes the foundation for a lot of our messaging work, is that we hear it from the clients themselves, right?
Nice.
And do you talk about that, Stephen, with the people that you're talking to as part of our initial
Yeah,
process?
and I was just gonna say, like, to dig into that for a second. Why do we do that? I think it's really become more and more important in the last couple of years, even like, just even like you said, within the RIA space. a lot of firms think that they're unique, and they are, but it can be hard to flesh that out, to really like get that down in writing, or to somehow convey how you are unique versus the firm down the street, or the next firm that claims to do the same things that you do with the same niches you do even. And you could go to ChatGPT or Claude or any of these AI tools now and say, spit me out a messaging plan for my target persona. Let's say it's pre-retirees. That's a very common one. I need clients who have $1 million or more in investable assets, and they are 50 to 65 years old. Spit me out a plan, and it'll do it, and it'll do a pretty darn good job too. So how do we extract something more than that when that has become so ubiquitous, right? Anybody can do that. It's free, and it takes
Yeah.
like 1 minute. So I was inspired by, like, I used to be in sales myself, and so I'm kind of a sales rep turned marketer. And I
Mhm.
think that is core to it, only because when I was in sales, right, I was front lines, like talking to the prospects, to the people who really drove the decisions. And that information, like, I heard it firsthand, right? Because I was the one meeting with them. And then I would want to feed that to my marketing team, which at the time was just me as well. So just in a three-person startup, I was marketing and sales. So I kind of blended the two, really. So like all my marketing content then became a reflection of the real conversations that I had with prospects, which is the most valuable, the most important content you can produce, is something that your prospects actually care about. And to be 100% sure that they care about it, you ask them and they tell you. So it's kind of like straight from the horse's mouth. That should be our kind of our guiding principle, our North Star that we're going to follow, is what do the prospects really care about? Like you said, they will tell us, especially because we're kind of a neutral third party. What do they see the most value in? What do they not see the most value in working with this advisor? Why they chose the advisor versus the others? Yeah, all the things you mentioned, where are their kind of watering holes for where they're going to get their information, this kind of how do they prefer to be communicated with? And then one awesome thing too that I think we have found with these interviews is, they'll give us these kind of golden nuggets of, like, if we just ask them kind of open-ended questions. If you were this firm, if you were our client, what would you do to try to attract more clients like yourself? And man, they come up with like some really good ideas. Sometimes they'll say like, oh yeah, like, I mean, if Mr. and Mrs. Advisor wants to come over and host a wine and cheese night at my house, I'd be happy to invite all my friends and the people from the neighborhood. Like, they could come over and hang out for a couple hours, maybe do a little presentation. I don't know. That might be an idea. Perfect. Let's bake that into the marketing
Yeah.
strategy. I think that's genius, right? So it's pretty simple when you think about it. Just trying to listen to the prospects, or listen to the clients that we want to replicate, and then use that to fuel our marketing strategy, and specifically the messaging. So again, it's like straight from the horse's mouth, like that we know that they're gonna resonate with it because they've told it to us firsthand. So yes, I think that's kind of the
Yeah.
inspiration behind that.
Just thinking about like a golden nugget from a recent series of client interviews. One of them, who has been a long-term client of one of the new firms that we started working with, just fed back to me because he was talking a little bit about how he referred the advisor a lot early on, but he just shared back over with me. He's like, I don't even think that they're looking for referrals anymore. I'm not even thinking that they want any new prospects, because I feel like they're probably so overloaded with all the ins and outs of what they're doing on the day-to-day
Whoa.
basis. And was able to bring that was able to bring that back over to the firm, who just hired us as a marketing agency so that they can get more leads, essentially, right? And just say, hey, let's think about how to potentially systematize your referral process so that there's not any sort of
Yeah.
this lack of clarity, or if there's so
Your
there's no
clients think you don't
confusion
want
about
any
the
more
fact that,
clients. Yeah, that's an issue.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, it's a great starting point, right? And so at the same time that we are interviewing our clients, we're also doing workshops with our clients themselves and hearing about what they think about their value proposition, what they think should be their target client. And so we're able to sort of merge what the clients are saying, what our clients are saying, into an overarching messaging guide to start and sort of lead all of our marketing work, right? And so we've streamlined that over the years. We've gotten it down to who we are, things like who the client thinks is their, key differentiator, their values, their voice and tone, how they want to appear in terms of their collateral and how they present themselves with their overall branding. And then we put together, like a word bank and a bunch of statements that sort of encapsulate what their style, tone, who they are, essentially, that they can pull from for all their marketing collateral. And then this is like one of the key pieces, I think, that's a big differentiator for RIAs is the who we serve, or essentially who we help, right? And I think the more niche, I know that, different firms, and we've talked about this a little bit, Stephen, as firms grow and they get bigger, they become almost, less hesitant sometimes to really nail down a niche audience or nail down a specific type of client that they're looking for in their marketing efforts. I think you start off at the beginning, you take on anybody that will listen, and then you get bigger and you still want to you don't want to like leave anybody out, right, when you're thinking about who you should be targeting. But it actually becomes more efficient for you as a differentiator if you really flesh out one or two types of personas that you want to go after that have different challenges, right? You mentioned pre-retirees earlier, Stephen, but tech professionals in their 30s and 40s, or senior to mid-level executives that are part of the big four accounting firms. The more niche you can really go into, and specifically how you help them, the better your messaging becomes overall. But there's always some pushback with that, don't you think, Stephen? Like always a little bit of like worry about leaving somebody out when you start
Yeah,
niching down
there's
like
pros
that
and
in your
cons to
messaging.
it for sure. I mean, yeah, how do you thread the needle
Yeah.
to kind of serve your existing client base who might not be a member or a colleague at one of the big four, but they're a great client and they've been your client for 7 years. You don't want to make them feel estranged or not recognized with everything that you're doing. But I think, yeah, you have to segment your messaging that way, and you can do it through intelligent marketing, really. Just set up, if you think about a high level, try to set up kind of personas, and maybe you have 3 different tracks of personas, unique messaging to them. And then like a really tactical example of how you could do that, email lists. If you're able to segment your email list into those 3 different buckets, then they could each of those audiences could have their own kind of messaging. Some will overlap, of course, and you don't need, if it's market commentary, I don't think you need to tailor market commentary towards, one person or the other. But if it's, some kind of specific way that you help solve their unique challenge, or you're asking for, say you're sending an email to somebody who works at the Big Four, and you want to ask for a referral in an email, or kind of make it apparent that you're looking for more clients at their company, you do that with a segmented email, and you obviously wouldn't send that to, persona B or persona C. So I think there's ways to do it, even on your website, right? Having different pages for the different personas or the different niches. It can be really hard. Then what do you put on your homepage? We've had this discussion quite a bit. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
how do you what's on the homepage? We get it that there's going to be sub pages that are going to be persona A, B, C, but on the homepage, like, where do you focus? And so I think it's really helpful to kind of talk that out as a leadership team, number one, because I do believe, when we do these kind of internal workshops, there's a lot of value in just getting everyone in the same room and kind of talking about it as a group, and then pairing it with like our interviews that you mentioned, and kind of trying to marry those two things, and then we can decide a good path forward. I think a lot of firms want to make an update, or they just, they each have their own idea about what it needs to be, but it can be really valuable to kind of step back, slow down for a second, talk about it, and then, document it into a marketing strategy, or a messaging strategy in this case, and then start to execute. So yeah, it's like threading the needle, I think. Very firm specific, right? It's how hard you want to go into the niche, and there's a lot of other factors, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you make a really good point about the current client base too, just in terms of thinking about your overarching marketing strategy. Let's say you find a lot of value in going after business owners, but you have a much smaller client base where you could potentially find referrals within that business owner community. And maybe you don't want to spend too much time consolidating all of your marketing efforts around business owners. You're looking for the short-term gains of people who have money now, like the corporate executive route, right? Or maybe you have a client base that's full of pre-retirees and retired prospects who have a lot of colleagues, or I guess their former colleagues, if they're retired, that have a lot of friends and family that are within that target bracket, and you want to really hone in on pre-retirees so that you can queue up referrals where you have collateral, whether it be like PDFs that you send out, or to your point, Stephen, like persona-based web pages that your referred prospects can find and see that value proposition. Maybe you want to focus there. So I think that the entire workshop process that we start off on, of really kind of allowing all the leadership team members to share their thoughts on that, leads to a foundational guide and a foundational like focal point for who we're going to be going after with our overarching marketing strategy. And so once you know that, and once you know what your clients are saying, you can build out a more comprehensive plan around that target audience, factoring in all the different ins and outs of what platforms they use, how they consume information, what kind of content is mostly going to attract them. If you do want to focus on referrals, what does that process look like? And so you have a good starting point going from there. I do want to mention just one more thing, so we have the who we are, who we serve. I want to make sure we get in the what we do. That is, I think, an important part of figuring out exactly how you differentiate yourself. Let's say that you are going after tech professionals, for instance, right? And you have a specialty or an expertise around equity compensation. I think that's really important to come out as part of your messaging across all the different, not just your website pages, but across all of your different social platforms and the content that you share, right? So really kind of thinking through, okay, not just all the services we offer, but specifically how our services meet the needs of our particular target persona. I think that's really important. And then how we do it is our last one. And that is, I think sometimes a key differentiator, even amongst RIAs, is like, what does that process look like when a client, from the moment that they have that first discovery call to going all the way through and becoming a client? What does the onboarding look like? And then when they become a client, is there a systematic planning process that they experience on an annual basis? Is there something special about what you do for your client before they become an official client and they sign? Like, those are all things that are really important to flesh out as part of your messaging, because those are all key differentiators that can be represented across all of your collateral. I think we call that we refer to that, or you refer to that, Stephen, as a client success map. Right.
Right, the last part, yeah, client success map. Like, what's the journey
Yeah.
you're going to take them on, as from a prospect to a client, and then in the years that they are a client, yeah, how do you work with them on a recurring kind of basis? I think it's really important just to, yeah, just kind of wrap this up, like tie it all together into a guide, because if you don't have think of it as if you don't have a brand guide, what ends up happening, same kind of concept is, you'll start to have stock imagery over here, illustrations over here, black and orange colors over here, and green and yellow colors over here. And everything starts to become disjointed the more you go and the more people you add to your firm and so on. Same thing with messaging, especially with messaging. What do your advisors, if somebody goes up to one of your advisors and says, hey, what do you guys do? And they're in an elevator with somebody, is that person's answer the same as all of your other advisory team's answer? And if you can't confidently say yes to that, then there's a lot of value in a messaging guide, because, yeah, again, part of it is what we use for digital marketing. It's kind of a underpinning kind of foundation to how we're going to write and produce collateral and, generate copy for your website and emails and social, et cetera, et cetera. But the other part of it is, a keyword phrase bank, like you said, something that your team can hold on to, maybe a two-liner statement, kind of a elevator pitch statement, little quick little phrases that people can refer to, that everyone's on the same page. And so when they're publicly facing, clients or COIs or whoever it may be, you're all kind of pulling from the same guide. A lot of value in that. So that's why we do it. And again, you could go down the path of, StoryBrand is a great messaging framework. It's written by Donald Miller, who wrote Blue Like Jazz. Very simplified framework, 7-step process. The book is an easy read. I would encourage people to check it out. Simon Sinek starts with why. There's a lot of really talented people in our space who talk about extracting your story. Deirdre Van Nest is in our office space over here in St. Pete, Florida, and she does a great job of this.
Oh, yeah,
extracting.
she's fantastic.
She's great, and she extracts your kind of your why story as an advisor. Why do you wake up every day and do what you do? And that really helps with differentiation. But whatever it is, you gotta, I would encourage people to come up with a framework and dive into it, because over time, yeah, the bigger your firm grows, it'll become disjointed if you don't have something to kind of tie back to, kind of this anchor, or we've been saying, this guide that kind of underpins everything. So for us, yeah, we generally take with a new client, just so we can explain our process. Like we generally work on this the first 4 weeks. We mix in other quick wins so that the client can start to trust us and see our value, and understand that we're credible and we know what the heck we're doing. But we're doing this kind of foundational messaging work on the front end, so then we have it right. So then we can produce social copy and collateral copy and website copy much more efficiently, as opposed to, okay, let's write this piece. What do we want to write? Okay, well, we're kind of starting over on each piece that way, as opposed to having this messaging guide. It's like that's where we kick off from each time. So, yeah, it's the way we do it. It has adapted over time, like you mentioned, but I think it's really valuable, and for us, it's a lot of fun. It's a really great way to get to know the client as well for us, and get to know the client's clients. So we've had a fun time doing it. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, just that in those first 4 weeks, right? We couple the client interview like key themes and takeaways. So we give some specifics around what the clients are saying per client interview, but we also are able to sort of consolidate, synthesize the key themes. So we take that in addition to an overarching audit of all the firms, collateral, platforms, website traffic, everything that you can think of. And so we take the workshops from what the clients are telling us, the advisory firms are telling us, what the interviews say, and the overarching audit to put together a comprehensive marketing strategy. So all of it sort of ties in together. I just wanted to add that it's all part of our initial process.
Yeah, I love it. What would be some examples of key themes? I mean, you go through, 10 interviews with different clients, and you start to hear the same
Yeah.
kind of, what would be some kind of examples of those?
Yeah, so key themes would be like everyone's kind of would be worried about this initial advisor that they followed with the transition, usually the founder or CEO of the firm. They're a little worried about what happens if that person leaves, for instance, right? And so we say to ourselves, okay, well, we got to really build up the credibility of the entire team and emphasize that in our marketing. Another great takeaway from a recent client is, hey, I really understood the value a lot of the initial planning process, but then I'm paying this annual fee for years 2, 3, 4, and I'm kind of having a hard time understanding what the value is after that, right? So that's a good like piece of
Mm.
client feedback that doesn't necessarily lead to marketing collateral, but something very important for retention and potential referrals, right? So we get all sorts of great themes that come from these like every time we do it, and that continues to be like a super valuable part of the process for us.
Yeah, love it. All right, Boston, thanks for chatting.
All right, thank you so much.